My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 48 years old, and for most of my life, I believe myself to be an ordinary, decent man. I work as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Omaha, Nebraska, where the tallest shapes on the skyline are grain elevators and weather-beaten church steeples, and where sunset ignites the Missouri River like a ribbon of burnished copper. I find comfort in the calm logic of load calculations, the quiet certainty that steel will perform exactly the way the equations promise when you draw the lines precisely. Give me a beam schedule, and I will tighten every bolt. For decades, I thought that was enough. I met Laura Harper 22 years ago in a corridor that smelled of copier toner and chalk dust. She was a red-haired nursing student with stubborn freckles on her nose and a laugh that felt like someone had flung open a window in a stuffy room. We were both waiting for a temperamental vending machine to dispense coffee. Mine came out first, lukewarm and bitter, but when her cup jammed, I offered her mine. She accepted, winced at the taste, and thanked me anyway. We spent our first date on the floor of the university library, trading flashcards and stealing glances each time we accidentally brushed knees. 5 months later, we were eating midnight pizza in a motel that advertised free HBO as though they were luxury. Those early years were a tangle of overdraft fees, rotating shifts, and stubborn dreams. We lived in a studio above a bakery where the smell of fresh bread woke us at 4 a.m. and where the radiator banged like a doomed marching band. I took entry-level drafting gigs. Laura pulled double shifts at the county hospital, returning home with scratches on her arms and stories about patients who died between commercials on the hallway television. We kept a ledger taped to the fridge, crossing off bills in red marker, celebrating each zero line with microwave popcorn. On our first anniversary, we lit a single candle and pretended we were camping rather than broke. When our son Caleb arrived, 6 weeks early and angry at the fluorescent ceiling of the neonatal ICU, nurses nicknamed him Lion Cub because of the way he roared during blood draws. Laura slept in a chair beside his incubator, charting oxygen levels on sticky notes. I read structural steel manuals aloud because the rhythm of my voice soothed him. The hospital bills looked like phone numbers, but we paid them dollar by dollar, sometimes choosing between diapers and dinner. Caleb came home healthy, loud, and perpetually curious. A boy who dismantled his first crib rail to see where the squeak lived. Over time, life found its own quiet rhythm. I earned my professional license. Laura became a charge nurse on the surgical floor. We bought a 2-story fixer-upper on Maple Street, painted every wall ourselves, and planted a sapling now tall enough to shade half the block. We were never a couple who finished each other's sentences, but we shared an unspoken shorthand. A raised eyebrow that meant, "Did you pay the bills?" A shoulder squeeze in passing that meant, "I see you." I genuinely believe those small gestures made us invincible. Looking back, the first fractures were quieter than splinters. Laura began spending more evenings away, cloaked in the respectable language of self-care. Pilates on Mondays, book club on Wednesdays, wine tastings on Fridays. Her phone, once abandoned on the coffee table, now traveled everywhere in her pocket like a secret pet. She laughed at texts I could not see, erased call histories before I glimpsed them, and sometimes stared through me as though she were thinking in a language I had never learned. The child's car seat appeared on a gusty Saturday in March. I was measuring cedar planks for a new deck when I noticed the bright plastic shell buckled into the rear of Laura's sedan. Caleb had just turned 17. We hadn't needed a car seat in over a decade. I tapped the tinted window, stared at the sticker that read "Princess on Board," and felt something inside me sag. When I asked about it, Laura shrugged and said a coworker had borrowed her car. She offered no further detail, and I, cowardly, asked no further questions. Suspicion is an engineer's enemy. It's an unverified load threatening every beam. It crept in. I found duplicate water bottles in her console, a second set of sunglasses, restaurant receipts dated for nights she claimed to be at yoga. At work, I pored over detailed drawings, but saw only Laura's evasive smile reflected in the vellum. I told coworkers she was busy, told Caleb she was tired, told myself I was imagining things. The lies tasted like pennies. Then came a phone call. It was a Tuesday, one of those days that slides through your memory without leaving fingerprints. I was redlining sheets for municipal parking garage when my cell buzzed. Laura's voice was clipped, professional. Be home by 7. We need to talk. The line went dead. I stared at the phone long enough for the screen to dim and reflect my own worried face. For the next 3 hours, I drove on autopilot through spreadsheets, praying for an explanation that never materialized. I pulled into our driveway at 6:58. The sky was the pale green of a healing bruise. At exactly 7, the front door opened. Laura entered first, coat wrapped tight like armor. Behind her came a tall man, broad-shouldered, shaved head, confident in the way people are when they believe the universe owes them sunlight. He carried a box labeled Kitchen Essentials. 2 children trailed him, a boy of about 10 gripping a handheld game console and a younger girl dragging a glittery backpack. They looked tired, confused, and curious. Kids who've been told to be polite without understanding why. Laura cleared her throat. Ethan, this is Scott Morrison. These are his kids, Lily and Mason. We're moving in. I hope you'll handle this like an adult. Her words echoed across the foyer, bouncing off the family photos arranged by year. My heartbeat became a sledgehammer. I whispered, "You're serious?" She nodded once, as surgeons do when the incision is marked. Scott's smile froze. The children stared at their shoes, refusing to glance up at the photographs lining our walls. Caleb emerged from the hallway, earbuds draped around his neck. He took in the tableau. Mother, stranger, stranger's children, father frozen in mid-breath, and squared his shoulders. At 17, he was already taller than me. His voice, however, carried the clarity of a boy who still believes fairness matters. Mom, he said, if you think you can bulldoze our family and swap dad for some random guy, you're wrong. He pivoted toward Scott. And you, if you actually had a spine, you wouldn't barge into another man's house with kids like a thief expecting a thank you. A hush followed, thick as wet cement. I faced Laura. You want a new life? Start somewhere else. This is my house, Caleb's house, and tonight you are guests who have overstayed. My voice sounded metallic, unforgiving. Laura called me cruel, said I was ruining everyone's future, demanded compromise for the children's sake. Hers, his, ours, the collective weight of her choices. I repeated myself in the same calm tone I used when describing allowable stress. They needed to leave. Scott opened his mouth, found no words, and finally steered his kids back toward the door. For weeks afterward, the silence in the house felt luxurious, a velvet quiet filled with the hiss of boiling pasta and the scratch of Caleb's guitar. The coil in my stomach unwound each evening as we discovered 2-person routines, making late-night pancakes, binge-watching documentaries about abandoned bridges, trading jokes about my terrible taste in music. I learned that Caleb liked his eggs over easy, hated rom-coms, and was secretly applying to architecture programs out of state. He learned that I still cried at sentimental commercials and that I kept every birthday card he ever made. Laura tried to return, first with contrition, long messages describing the depth of her regret, then with fury, accusing me of poisoning Caleb against her. She wrote that Scott had proven unreliable, that Lily missed her school, that financial pressures were crushing them. Each message tugged at a rope I had already dropped. 22 years is a long span to demolish, but I refused to be the engineer of a self-inflicted collapse. I did not respond. Instead, I poured myself into tangible projects. I sanded the deck until the cedar gleamed like honey. I replaced squeaky stair treads, sorted thousands of photographs into chronological albums, and even took up running, discovering that 5 miles at dawn can rinse out a heartache better than any sermon. Caleb joined me, sometimes sprinting ahead, circling back, treating our route through the sleepy neighborhood like a game of tag with the sunrise. We talked about college essays, guitar riffs, and the difference between settling and rooting. Peace, I discovered, is not the absence of noise, but the presence of purposeful sound. Skillet butter sizzling, rain tapping the tin porch roof, Caleb's laughter ricocheting down the hallway. Some nights, after he went to bed, I walked room to room, placing my palm against the walls I had once painted with Laura, feeling the furnace's quiet thrum, the solid reassurance of the home we built. The house, like a well-designed frame, adapted to new loads without complaint. I think often of our wedding, a courthouse ceremony on a humid June afternoon when the air conditioning failed and everyone fanned themselves with folded programs. Laura wore a tea-length dress she'd bought secondhand, and I borrowed a tie from my brother that was 2 shades too bright. The judge mispronounced our last name twice, and the microphone squealed during the vows, but none of it mattered. We left the building drenched in sweat and confetti, drove to a lakeside park, and ate deli sandwiches from cooler. We toasted with lukewarm cola, convinced the world belonged to us if we just worked hard enough. There was a year when debt hemmed us in so tightly that every unplanned expense felt like a ceiling tile dropping. The alternator died the same week the furnace quit after an ice storm, and we spent 3 nights huddled under blankets, sipping instant cocoa while the thermostat sat stubbornly at 52 degrees. We argued about whether to cancel the internet, who should pick up more overtime, and whether it was fair to dream of a house where we could barely afford milk. We survived by taking turns believing things would improve. In hindsight, Laura's drift began long before the car seat. She started buying scented candles that made her sneeze, changed her hairstyle twice in 1 month, subscribed to glossy magazines she never read. She said I talked about work too much, that Caleb and I had inside jokes she didn't understand, that the house felt cramped even after I knocked out a wall between the kitchen and dining room. I suggested a weekend getaway to Denver. She claimed exhaustion. I hired a babysitter and booked a cabin. She canceled. Somewhere along the way, my wife became a visitor in her own life. One evening, 3 weeks after Scott's arrival, Caleb and I turned the backyard into a drive-in. We hauled the flat screen onto the deck, strung fairy lights between trees, and watched a vintage western under a sky bruised purple. Halfway through, the Wi-Fi died, and we spent 20 minutes rebooting the router while mosquitoes left constellations on our ankles. Caleb laughed until he snorted, and I realized it had been years since I'd heard him sound that carefree. I almost texted Laura to share the moment, then remembered she was busy redefining her horizons. I considered therapy, still do, but for a while I found an unlikely confessor in my retired neighbor, Mr. Delgado, a former Marine who grows tomatoes the size of softballs. We leaned over the fence at dusk, swapping stories about rust-proofing and crabgrass. When I finally told him what happened, he spat a sunflower seed and said, "Son, sometimes the best thing you can do for a collapsing bridge is blow the damn thing up before it drops commuters into the river." His blunt wisdom broke something loose inside me, and I laughed harder than I had since college. Laura's longest email arrived on Thanksgiving at 3:12 a.m. It was 6 screens long, a rambling mixture of memories. Our first dance, Caleb's first fever, interlaced with excuses about loneliness and midlife panic. She wrote that I had become a blueprint she could read in her sleep, and that Scott made her feel unpredictable in a good way. 3 paragraphs later, unpredictability had become chaos. Scott resented step-parenthood. She ended by asking whether the guest room was still painted her favorite shade of blue. I archived the message without reply. Fear is a sneaky architect. It hides in routine, masquerades as comfort, then reappears as bitterness when the unexpected happens. I feared poverty, so I hoarded work hours. I feared failure, so I accepted safe projects. I feared conflict, so I mistook silence for harmony. Laura's betrayal bulldozed those illusions. My life is Messier now. Salt shakers on the wrong shelf. Laundry half-folded. Phone alarms reminding me to buy milk, but the mess is honest. Caleb, meanwhile, has blossomed in the fresh air of our new normal. He drafted blueprints for a tree house, complete with a cantilevered balcony, and convinced me to help build it. We spent Saturdays perched among branches, hammering joists while classic rock blared from a battery-powered speaker. He teased me for measuring everything twice. I teased him for forgetting the level on the ground. When we tightened the final lag bolt and stepped back, the structure swayed gently, then settled, proving itself sound. Caleb named it Fort Resilience. Laura's sister, Megan, stopped by in February, carrying a pie and a face full of awkward sympathy. She toured the house like an appraiser, noting the empty coat hook where Laura's parka once hung and the bare stretch of wall where our wedding portrait had been. Over coffee, she admitted she never trusted Scott and that Laura had always chased excitement the way dry fields chase rain. Her concern was genuine, but it reminded me that families are ecosystems. One species' wildfire becomes another's fertile ground. I am learning the difference between forgiveness and permission. Forgiveness is a release valve, freeing the forgiver from corrosive pressure. Permission is an invitation to repeat the wound. I can forgive Laura from a safe distance, wish her peace, hope the children find stability, yet still lock my door. The boundary is the lesson. Caleb graduates next spring. We talk about a road trip to the Pacific coast, just the two of us and a map with more empty space than highways. He wants to surf in Oregon. I want to photograph lighthouses. Maybe we'll do both. Maybe we'll keep driving until the odometer rolls a milestone and the sun sets behind us like a burning bridge. Freedom tastes electrifying, like the first inhale after years in a windowless office. Sometimes, to understand a structure's true strength, you have to feel it shake under your boots. Plans may promise integrity, but a tremor always tells the truth, showing which pieces are steel and which are only plywood painted silver. Caleb and I are steel, the rest was ornament. I am no hero, just a man who finally refused to brace a failing beam. Yet here I stand, upright, coffee in hand, ready for the next load test. Tomorrow I'll brew a fresh pot, drive to work, check finite element models, then return to a house that sings only with the sounds we choose. Guitar chords, skillet sizzles, easy laughter. Seasons will storm and freeze, but the frame will flex, not crack. If the ground trembles again, Caleb and I will brace each other, trusting that loyalty outlasts aftershocks. The morning light filters through the maple leaves, scattering gold across the porch floor as I sip my coffee. The deck boards creak beneath my boots, each groan a reminder of shaked foundations that have settled into strength. Across the yard, the treehouse Caleb designed stands proud, a quiet monument to collaboration and resilience. He swings in the doorway, sketchbook in hand, eyes bright, already planning additions. A pulley for snacks, perhaps a lookout perch. Soon the school bus will arrive to carry him to graduation. I remember the first time he climbed into that flawed car seat, the one that didn't belong when our lives veered off course. Today he steps forward as a young man ready for the next load test. College essays, scholarship deadlines, the promise of independence. In the weeks ahead, we'll share late-night calls, his voice crackling through earbuds as he recounts roommate debates and cafeteria experiments. I'll mail extra socks and my scribbled encouragements. These small rituals become our new scaffolding, supporting us when distance stretches every joint. Later today, I will hear his name called on the auditorium stage and watch the tassel shift. Neighbors and old friends, people who cheered at basketball games and recitals, will rise to their feet. We will stand together for photographs, father and son in matching suits, eyes bright with hope. And when dusk falls, I will help him pack the car, lob a basketball one last time, then let him rest his head before he turns north. Tomorrow he will vanish around the bend, textbooks in the back seat, dreams in his heart. I will return inside, Press my palm against the wall where his first pencil sketch hangs, an eagle in flight, and recall that every structure, no matter how battered, can inspire fresh designs. Whenever doubt returns, I will remember a boy who spoke truth in our foyer, and I will stand firm again. The house itself will adjust to his absence. The porch swing will tap in the breeze. The tree house will wait for summer visits. I will patch the holes where I hung his drawings, plant perennials beneath the window where he leaned. The maple sapling we planted together now towers overhead, its roots entwined with our shared history. Sometimes I catch myself expecting apologies that will never come, a message from Laura, a regretful voicemail. But forgiveness, I have learned, can be silent, an engineer of inner peace. I lock the door not as a barrier, but as proof that boundaries can heal and sustain. Our epilogue remains unwritten. Visits and messages, backpacks and home projects, quiet pride and loud laughter. Through every turning point, the foundation stands unmoved, our bond tempered by trial. We are ordinary men forged in the extraordinary, and our story continues in every sunrise, every measured beam, every heartbeat. And so it begins,